So the next logical place to go is into science. So if Robert's the historical one, then I'm definitely the science-minded one. So there's a lot of sociology mixed in with art theory, mixed in with physics, all of which I've studied at some point or another to a certain degree, and they're really difficult to move around on this small table without bashing the camera every which way. So there's a lot of drawing books here as well. Oh, and I guess that should probably have gone into the sports one, though it is technically kind of a science book. That's one from when I was a teenager. You can kind of tell why I've got that one. The Idiot's Guide to Understanding Einstein. It's the only, dummy's guide or whatever I own, and as someone who studied Einstein properly, that's just a weird chemistry thing, then again, I recommend it if you're interested, because it explains it in really easy and really easy to understand ways. And if you're interested in beekeeping, which I know is a bit of a weird jump, then this is the book. It's, well, if you're Australian, it's got absolutely everything that you could ever hope to know about keeping bees in this country. It's just an astonishing work. I tried to say astounding and astonishing at the same time there. Bring it back to physics, here is a couple of Paul Davies books, which, again, if you're interested at all in multiverse theory or about nature of time itself, definitely ones to pick up. Very readable, very easy to understand, and uses a lot of very fun examples. More drawing books, biology, that's, let me show you. Hello, Pico. So, that's why I have books on bird intelligence. Now this one's a very special one to me. David Attenborough, when I was a kid, and, well, even now actually, was one of my absolute role models. And I got to meet him once at a special dinner that I went to, and he signed the front of my book for me. He actually said to me, do you want me to dedicate it to you, or to write a message in there? And I was maybe 10 at the time, and I was just so terrified at meeting someone I admired so much, so I just shook my head and said, no, just sign it, please. It's like that episode of Community where Troy is so scared that he's going to disappoint LeVar Burton. More physics. Physics. More sociology. And then just textbooks and biology. Oh, there's the stack and the table gone. Now onto something a little less weighty, if only literally, comedy. So I've got a lot of funny books, basically. So I've got everything from the 3 Harry Potter parodies that Michael Gerber wrote, which honestly, I am not a fan of parodies in general, but these 3, especially the second one, are just genuinely so funny, because they're looking up to the subject matter admiringly that they're parodying, not, looking down on it with scorn. Then I've got a whole collection of Sue Townsend books, who wrote the Adrian Mole books, almost all of which these are, except those last 2 there, who honestly has got to be one of the funniest writers to have ever lived. They're all about growing up as a teenager. Well, the first ones are all growing up as a teenager in Thatcher-era England, and they just paint such an evocative portrait through the absolute clueless nature of their pseudo-intellectual main character, and it honestly makes me really scared and sad sometimes how much of myself I can see in him. Honestly, there are just so many books to go through that pretty much assume that if you see it in this stack, that's pretty much a recommendation to go and read it, or to check out the author. Some things may not have aged quite so brilliantly, but others have really well. Some are just really weird. If you saw me talking about Sue Townsend's Adrian Mole in the last one, I have no idea what to make of this. Got it from an op shop, haven't read it yet. Some more weird Australian classics, which, I don't know, maybe they come off as racist now, but I haven't read them in a long time. Again, you've read my other work, you know how much of an influence that is. But you may be surprised by how much of an influence these are. Seriously, go and pick up any Winnie the Pooh book, and then have a read of Ephemeris. I got that just because of the cover, I haven't read it. Now this one's worth pausing on for a moment, because it's just the weirdest book of strange things to try and make. None of which would actually work very well, but that's not the point. The point is making them. And this was actually a gift from a friend of mine who I met through her teaching me to play the trumpet. Now, I've got all the Bridget Jones books here. I haven't read this one yet, just picked it up. And they would be my guilty pleasure if I felt any guilt over reading them, which I don't. And this is one that I thought was funny back in the day, but kind of leafed through it now, haven't read it in a while. Seems pretty sexist. You know, in a way, I feel like perhaps my sense of humour has been ruined by, you know, political correctness, aka, you know, not being a dick to people. But in other ways, you know, I think it's been greatly improved, because now I laugh at things like Danny DeVito saying egg. And now we're just into general fiction. So this teetering stack of books are the kind of Orientalist series written by James Clavell, beginning with King Rat, and they run all the way through the history of this fictional trading company in Asia. And honestly, you know, when I read them, I just thought they were the best, and I couldn't get enough of them. But haven't read them for a while, may not hold up so well. Another author for whom that's definitely true is Michael Crichton, which brings us into science fiction. And yes, it's Crichton, not Crichton or Crichton or however else it gets mispronounced. Sphere holds up pretty well, but the rest of his stuff, I used to have a complete collection, but I've gotten rid of most of it, as you can see. But yeah, rereading it recently, I was really stunned by just how sexist it is. And not only that, but also how implicitly racist some of it is, and especially how regressive it all is. Lord of Light, by the way, Roger Zelazny, definitely worth reading. And if you're a fan of a lot of old sci-fi that's in the public domain, definitely give Rainbow Mars a read. I don't want to spoil it, but you'll know why. Then just Arthur C. Clarke, Fred Hoyle. Got a couple of Fred Hoyle books. And, as if to turn it completely around from Michael Crichton, I've got Time Raiders, which is basically time travel, sci-fi, fantasy, feminist, erotic fiction, which is super great. I mean, with that description, how could it not be? And then we're into horror, which may be a smaller stack of books from me than you'd expect. But pretty much everything here is good stuff. And, now this one here, Dennis Wheatley, his character Gregory Sallust was the direct inspiration for James Bond, and is just kind of a better version of James Bond, quite frankly, because his stories get all sorts of cool supernatural stuff in them as well. It never feels weird or like it doesn't belong, so this one's all about ghosts fighting the Nazis, but with basically James Bond running around in the middle. Of course, kind of books on horror without The Exorcist, which is just as good as the movie, quite honestly. This is one that someone gave me. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet. And exactly the same with this, which is, I really enjoyed the TV show, but apparently the books, they get all weird and supernatural as well, but there it doesn't work. Now, these are some that I know if they really count as horror because they're kind of either based on true stories or they're, you know, just stories about domestic abuse, but, I mean, if that's not horror, I don't know what is. Domestic abuse, I mean, not the books I'm holding up currently. Then we've got this stack at the bottom here, which aren't all horror, but I feel like their author would approve of them being in this category, which are the works of Joey Camo, which I believe is every one of his stories, and they're this one's a collection of erotic fiction, and then the rest are all horror or comedy or queer or combination thereof. All of them are great. Some of them, the morality hasn't aged brilliantly, I guess, just in terms of saying things about gender roles, but, you know, he's a really progressive queer man, and his heart's always been in the right place, and he's definitely learned with time. His work just gets better and better, and I can't recommend it enough. And speaking of James Bond, I've only got these two, but they are really good in their own right. And what would a collection of general fiction be without every single Harry Potter book, including, right down at the bottom there, the 8th one, which, I mean, I say that because it has pretty much the exact same plot as the 8th one. If you don't know My Immortal, I highly recommend, if you're a Harry Potter fan, you pick this up. This edition, copy edited by a friend of mine, just my little claim to fame. Then the next stack over here, not this one obviously, but the rest is what I call ergodic fiction, which I kind of can't think of a better name for it, but it's basically just things that are intentionally written in a way that's sort of confusing to read. You know, people like Thomas Pynchon there, and Umberto Eco, more Pynchon there. You know, you really get out what you put in with them, and wouldn't recommend them for everyone, but I would highly recommend them. Tolkien. I'm kind of glad that they took a bunch of stuff from the Silmarillion and put it into the Hobbit film, even though it kind of bloated the Hobbit out and made it probably a bit less good of a movie than it could have otherwise been, purely because, you know, there's just so much stuff in there that just couldn't be made into its own film. You couldn't make the Silmarillion into its own movie, but a lot of good content in there. Now, these are the Dresden Files books. I've got the 4th somewhere, and I've read a few more of the others. There's about 12 of them. Now, if you're the kind of person who likes television, but not really so much books, then I really couldn't recommend highly enough the Dresden Files books to you, because it's like watching TV, but in book form. Give them a try. Max Barry, I've actually got all of his books, but I think I linked them to someone and didn't get them back. But he's an Australian author, and well worth reading. So is Matthew Riley. Max Barry, though, very funny, really clever books. Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing, one of my favourite books, one of my favourite films. Trainspotting, also a great film, well worth a read. Haven't seen the film of Last of the Mohicans, but I enjoyed the book for what it was. That's actually a children's book from way back when that belonged to my grandmother, which has got some absolutely gorgeous illustrations, and I used to be just fascinated with the cross-hatching. Now, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. Now that's one that I wish I'd gotten into as a teenager instead of friggin' Ayn Rand. Things would have been a lot nicer. And maybe I've already... No, they're in a different stack. I've got a whole bunch of the T.H. White Merlin books, because again, I loved those as a kid. Aha, no, here we go. Once and Future King by T.H. White. So it was in that stack behind me all along. Which, oh, now, here is an important book, at least to me in my own personal literary history. The Talking Parcel by Gerald Durrell, who you probably would know from My Family and Other Animals, which his travelogues about animal hunting are probably better known. But it's a children's book all about different mythological creatures living in an underground cave in Greece, where they can believe in each other, and that keeps them alive, since people don't believe in them anymore, and that's causing them to die out. So, you know, I've said Star Wars is what made me want to make films, but I guess if I was to be really honest and more precise about it, Star Wars is what gave me the desire to make films, and Talking Parcel was what gave me the direction, because I've always thought I would love to do a feature film adaptation of it, and I still would. Now this, Frank Schatzing, I haven't read all this. I started, you can probably see, oh, my bookmark's long fallen out, there's dust on it. You know, I do like huge, long, complex sci-fi books, as long as they're kind of weird and interesting, not just generic fluff. But this one I flipped open and it was something about a man's glass eye pops out as they're running along and he goes, "No, leave it, leave it, now you've stolen the money, I can buy another one!" And I thought, yep, no, gotta read it. I also read a shorter one of his stories, I can't remember the name of, that I really liked. And I've got the complete Sherlock Holmes, which are some of my favourite stories of all time. There's even the worst ones are still extremely entertaining, even though Conan Doyle himself really hated them. That's why he killed him off, and from popular demand was forced to bring him back. But he always thought that his life's work would be these extremely dull histories that he wrote. And he'd have been really pissed off if he knew that we were still making movie adaptations of Sherlock Holmes today. So now we're into the final stack of general fiction. So most of these are books that I've been given, or saw the movie adaptation of, and wanted to check out the original, or just saw X-Library and read the blurb and thought, hey, yeah, I'll give that a go. So haven't read any of those ones so far. Jim Butcher, same guy who wrote Dresden Files, his friend gave me that, and just haven't really been able to quite get into it. I've got all three Hunger Games books, which, again, would be a guilty pleasure if I felt any guilt for liking them, which I don't. Oh, yeah, of course, probably the best book ever written, right there. I can't recommend this one enough. See if I can find some of the amazing artwork to show off to you. You can get this through the Zunfa website. Can't recommend it enough! And, oh, the bottom of the stack, probably, again, one of my favourite books and films of all time. And William Goldman, probably one of the greatest screenwriters of all time. I have his book on screenwriting, which you would have seen me flip through somewhere in that giant stack.